She was once the most famous female singer in America. Connie Francis wasn't just a pop star, she was a phenomenon. By the late 1950s, her voice was everywhere, and for a while, it seemed like nothing could stop her. But today, at 87 years old, she lives a quiet, almost forgotten life, far from the spotlight she once owned. For many, her name brings back memories of jukebox hits and teenage dreams. But behind the success was a woman battling tragedy after tragedy: assault, mental illness, financial loss, and betrayal from those closest to her. She vanished from the public eye for years, only to re-emerge with a soft voice, a fragile smile, and a heartbreaking truth. She was never safe, even at the height of her fame. Now, as the world forgets the voice that once defined a generation, the question remains: what really happened to Connie Francis? And how does a woman who gave everything to the world spend her final years in silence? Before the tragedies, before the heartbreak, Connie Francis was a little girl with a powerful voice and an even stronger will. Born Concetta Rosa Maria Franconero on December 12, 1937, in Newark, New Jersey, she grew up in a working-class Italian-American family with big dreams. But those dreams weren't just hers. They were her father's, too. George Franconero Sr. was known for being strict, controlling, and fiercely ambitious. He believed Connie was destined for greatness and pushed her into the world of music before she was even a teenager. At the age of 4, Connie was already performing at neighborhood parties and church functions, impressing adults with her poise and perfect pitch. By 10, she was playing the accordion and singing on local radio. Her father managed everything: what she sang, how she dressed, who she saw, and especially who she didn't. Fame wasn't an accident. It was a mission. She landed a spot on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, one of the most popular shows of the early television era. That appearance changed everything. Suddenly, Connie had a manager, a growing fan base, and offers from record labels. But her first few singles didn't make much of an impact. She was almost dropped, until 1958. That's when everything changed with Who's Sorry Now? It wasn't a new song, it had been written in 1923, but Connie's version, filled with heartbreak and vulnerability, hit like a lightning bolt. It became a smash hit and launched her into the stratosphere. From there, hit after hit followed: Stupid Cupid, Lipstick on Your Collar, Everybody's Somebody's Fool. She had become a household name, and not just in America. Connie Francis sang in multiple languages, charting around the globe. But even at the height of her fame, her life was tightly controlled. Her father didn't just guide her career, he dominated it. He forbade her from dating, especially when it came to one man, Bobby Darin. The two young stars fell deeply in love in secret, but George Franconero disapproved. When Darin proposed to Connie, her father threatened him with violence and had him forcibly removed from her life. She never forgave her father for that. Years later, she'd describe it as the moment her heart was permanently broken. Connie Francis had the fame, the fans, and the fortune. But she didn't have freedom. Every step forward came with someone else pulling the strings. And as her fame grew, so did the cost of maintaining it. Behind the scenes, the pressure was building, and eventually, it would all come crashing down. By the early 1960s, Connie Francis had become more than just a pop singer. She was America's sweetheart. Her voice could break hearts and heal them in the same breath. She was performing sold-out concerts around the world, recording songs in Italian, German, Spanish, Yiddish, and Japanese, and starring in Hollywood films like Where the Boys Are, which became a teen sensation. She was everywhere, TV, radio, magazines, and yet she was increasingly alone. While other stars partied and dated, Connie worked. Her schedule was brutal. Late-night studio sessions, international flights, back-to-back shows. There was no time for real friendships, no time for love. Her father remained in control, managing her every move and pushing her harder with each success. To the outside world, she was glamorous, graceful, and lucky. But inside, she was starting to feel trapped, boxed in by an image she didn't choose, by a life that wasn't entirely her own. Her music, though, remained undeniable. She dominated the charts, becoming the first woman in history to have a #1 single in both the US and the UK. She recorded hits like "Don't Break the Heart That Loves You and My Happiness," songs soaked in longing and regret, emotions she knew all too well. She was a master of capturing heartbreak in a 3-minute song because she was living it behind the curtain. And then came the changes. The Beatles arrived, and the music scene shifted. Suddenly, bubblegum pop and old-fashioned ballads weren't what teenagers wanted. Connie tried to adapt, recording more modern material and embracing different styles. But it wasn't enough. Her chart success began to fade. Behind the scenes, she was growing tired, mentally, physically, and emotionally. In 1967, she made the decision to take a step back from performing. It was time to rest, to recover. But before she could find peace, the worst chapter of her life began. In 1974, after a comeback performance at Westbury Music Fair in New York, Connie checked into a nearby hotel. That night, her world shattered. A man broke into her room, raped her, and left her traumatized and terrified. She disappeared from public life immediately. No one saw her. No new music came out. And for the first time, the girl who had been born for the spotlight went completely dark. The bubbly, smiling voice of America had been silenced, and no one knew if she'd ever return. The attack in 1974 marked the darkest turning point in Connie Francis's life. The woman who had once been America's bright, smiling sweetheart was now battling demons no hit song could drown out. The trauma she endured that night at the Howard Johnson Motor Lodge not only broke her spirit, it nearly took her life. She retreated from the public eye completely, crippled by fear, paranoia, and shame. And though the man responsible was later caught and convicted, the damage had already been done. Connie began to spiral into a long period of mental and emotional collapse. What followed was a harrowing stretch of hospital stays, lawsuits, and a very public breakdown. She became a recluse, withdrawing into a fog of depression. For years, she couldn't sleep in the dark. She couldn't stay in hotel rooms. She had been a star since childhood, but now, the fame only made her feel more vulnerable. It reminded her that even with all her success, she had no real protection. Her career was paused, but her life wasn't. She attempted multiple comebacks throughout the late 70s and early 80s, releasing albums and performing in limited engagements. The media was kinder to her than one might expect. They remembered her as the golden girl of pop music. But she was no longer that same person. Her smile was more cautious. Her voice, though still strong, carried a weariness that hadn't been there before. And the industry, too, had changed. She was trying to make her way back in a business that had moved on without her. Behind the scenes, her battles were becoming harder to hide. She was diagnosed with manic depression, now called bipolar disorder, and began a long cycle of treatment that included hospitalization and medication. She was in and out of psychiatric institutions more than a dozen times. Her own mother once had to call emergency services after Connie attempted to take her own life. Her condition worsened after the death of her beloved brother, George Jr., in a tragic shooting in 1981. He had always been her protector, one of the few people she trusted. His loss sent her even deeper into isolation. Financial struggles followed. Though she had made millions during her peak, the medical expenses, legal battles, and long periods of inactivity drained her wealth. She filed lawsuits, most famously against the motel where she was assaulted, winning a record-setting $2.5 million judgment. But the emotional cost was incalculable. She had gone from living in a Hollywood Hills mansion to quieter, modest homes in Florida and New Jersey. Still comfortable, but a far cry from the glitz that had once defined her world. Despite everything, Connie refused to let her legacy disappear. In the 1990s and early 2000s, she began performing again, this time on her terms. She returned to the stage to connect with the fans who had never forgotten her. Her shows weren't about topping the charts anymore. They were about healing, resilience, and remembering the girl who once sang "Where the Boys Are" with a smile that could light up the world. These performances were raw. Sometimes she'd cry on stage. Sometimes she'd talk about her past with unfiltered honesty. And every now and then, when the lighting was just right and the microphone caught the perfect note, audiences saw a flash of the Connie Francis they remembered. But now, she was more than just a singer. She was a survivor. Through advocacy work, she began speaking out about mental health, sexual assault, and the pressures of fame. She didn't want pity. She wanted people to understand what it had cost her to stay alive. Her autobiography, Who's Sorry Now?, became a bestseller, offering a brutally honest look at the ups and downs of her life. It was unflinching. She didn't hide behind the spotlight anymore. At 87, Connie Francis lives a quieter life. She's no longer in the headlines, but she remains a symbol of strength. She survived what few could. And while the world may remember her for the hits and the heartbreak, there's something even more powerful in her story. She kept going, even when the music stopped. By the early 2000s, Connie Francis had done something few stars from her era ever managed. She survived. Not just career-wise, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And yet, life continued to test her strength. While her performances were more selective and her public appearances rare, Connie remained committed to two things: her legacy and her healing. But behind the scenes, new challenges emerged, this time involving those closest to her. Though she was once seen as the most eligible bachelorette in America, Connie's romantic life had always been troubled. She married 4 times, and each relationship ended in heartbreak. The most publicized marriage, to Bobby Darin's former manager Dick Canellis, lasted only a few months. Her other marriages, though mostly out of the spotlight, were also short-lived. In interviews, she admitted that she never truly found lasting love, at least not the kind that gave her peace. "I always fell for the wrong guy," she once said, with a half-smile that barely masked the pain. One of the deepest losses in her personal life came from the fact that she never had biological children. Connie had long wanted to be a mother, but the chaos of her youth and the trauma of her adulthood made it difficult. At one point, she explored adoption, and she has been involved in the lives of several extended family members and close friends' children, but she never raised a child of her own. It's one of the few regrets she openly discussed in her later years. As she aged, Connie's health declined. Years of medications, surgeries, and the natural wear of a life lived at full speed took their toll. She underwent several operations on her vocal cords, which left her voice diminished but still recognizable. Her once strong soprano now trembled slightly, But fans didn't care. They just wanted to see her. In her Florida home, she found sanctuary. It wasn't the mansion she once dreamed of, but it was peaceful. She decorated it with memorabilia, photos, and letters from fans that reminded her she hadn't been forgotten. Financially, Connie remained modest. She was never one for extravagance, and after years of setbacks, she learned to live simply. Her wealth, while not what it once was, remained comfortable thanks to royalties, book sales, and careful management. But unlike so many stars, Connie never chased wealth. What she wanted was love, peace, and a place to belong. And in her final chapter, that's exactly what she tried to create. In her later years, Connie Francis became something far more powerful than a pop star. She became a symbol of survival, of vulnerability, and of truth in an industry built on illusion. While the world had changed dramatically since her heyday, Connie's story remained relevant, especially to younger generations just beginning to understand the pressure and pain fame can bring. And as social media brought her name back into conversation, old fans and new listeners alike began to revisit her catalog, not just for the nostalgia, but for the rawness hidden in those melodies. In interviews from the 2010s and beyond, Connie spoke candidly about her past, no longer sugarcoating the darkness she endured. She spoke about the music industry's failure to protect young women. She described the loneliness that came with being adored by millions, but loved by few. "They knew my voice," she said, "but they didn't know my heart." And through these moments of reflection, a deeper truth emerged. Her fame had been both a blessing and a cage. Despite the years of trauma and silence, Connie continued to fight for her voice, literally and figuratively. She worked with advocacy groups on mental health and sexual assault awareness. She funded programs that helped victims of violence and stood firmly as a voice for women who had none. In doing so, she redefined her legacy. No longer just the girl who sang "Who's Sorry Now," she became the woman who survived everything. Even in her physical frailty, Connie remained mentally sharp. She kept up with news, music, and politics, often expressing opinions with the same fiery spirit that once pushed her to stardom. She stayed in touch with fans through handwritten notes, birthday messages, and occasional public statements. And each time she did, her supporters rallied. It was as though her voice still had the power to heal, not just others, but herself. The world had moved on from the era of the jukebox, but Connie Francis never really left. Her songs still played in diners, movie soundtracks, and family road trips across the country. Her name still appeared on Greatest Voices of All Time lists, and when younger singers covered her classics, they often remarked how much emotion and pain her performances carried, something they hoped to emulate. And so, while she may no longer grace the stages of Las Vegas or appear on late-night talk shows, Connie's impact only grew. In the quiet of her Florida home, surrounded by memories and mementos, she continued to live with dignity. And in a world that often forgets its icons, Connie Francis remains unforgettable. Not because she was flawless, but because she was real. As Connie Francis reached her mid-80s, a quiet reverence settled around her name. She had become one of the last living legends from a golden era, a woman who had weathered storms that would have broken most. Now, 87, her days are slower, filled with reflection, memory, and peace. The Florida home she lives in isn't just where she sleeps. It's a museum of her past, a safe place lined with gold records, handwritten notes from Frank Sinatra, framed film posters, and black and white photos that capture a time when she was on top of the world. Visitors are rare. She keeps a small circle: nurses, close family, and a few loyal friends who check in regularly. Her health, while fragile, is stable. She uses a walker now, and she tires easily, but her mind remains sharp. She can still recount exact details of old recording sessions and describe the smell of the studio at MGM when she laid down the vocals for her first hit. And when she talks about her fans, her voice softens. "They stayed with me," she often says, "even when I disappeared." Financially, Connie lives comfortably, though not lavishly. The industry wasn't always kind to its stars, and at one point she lost millions due to bad management and lawsuits. But thanks to the continued royalties from her vast music catalog and the loyal fan base who still buys physical albums and streams her hits, she's able to enjoy a life free of financial stress. She's never been flashy. Unlike other stars who spent their wealth on mansions or yachts, Connie preferred simple pleasures: a good book, old movies, letters from fans. And those letters never stopped coming. From across the globe, Italy, Germany, Brazil, Japan, people still send handwritten notes thanking her for getting them through heartbreaks, illnesses, and wartime. Some were written by grandmothers who once danced to Stupid Cupid at sock hops, others by young people who discovered her on YouTube and were moved by the pain in her voice. Every so often, she'll reply with a thank you card and a signed photo. She may no longer be a household name in the modern sense, but in certain homes, Connie Francis is a hero. A quiet reminder that strength doesn't always look like a comeback tour. Sometimes, it looks like a woman choosing to live out her final years in peace, on her terms, with her dignity intact. Though the world outside had changed drastically, inside her Florida home, Connie Francis remained a woman of tradition. She began each morning with a ritual: classical music playing softly in the background, a cup of tea, and the occasional flip through old scrapbooks filled with magazine clippings, tour photos, and telegrams from an era when fame still felt like magic. But behind this calm routine was a life still marked by the shadows of loss, particularly the heartbreak that had never quite healed. The murder of her brother George in 1981 was a wound that time never truly closed. George had been her protector, her constant, her best friend in a world that often betrayed her. His death was violent, senseless, and shook her to the core. She withdrew from public life after that tragedy and carried the grief with her every day since. "They took him from me," she once said in a rare interview, her voice cracking, "and with him, they took a part of me I never got back." Even decades later, the trauma lingered. On anniversaries of his death, she lit a candle and sat quietly for hours. Friends said she never spoke during those moments, just sat with the weight of his absence. That grief informed much of her later writing, including her memoir, where she peeled back the glamour to show the vulnerability behind the voice. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't pretend to be okay. And that honesty only deepened the public's admiration for her. In her 70s and 80s, Connie battled severe depression, PTSD, and physical setbacks, but she remained open about her mental health. She became a quiet advocate, encouraging others not to hide their struggles. Her bravery in speaking about her psychiatric hospitalizations and medication regimens helped destigmatize those issues for many of her fans, especially older women who had grown up believing those subjects were taboo. Through it all, Connie never stopped believing in love, though she rarely spoke about her romantic regrets. At this point in her life, she says her heart belongs to the music and to the memories of those who truly loved her. She keeps a photo of her parents by her bedside and still hums the lullabies her mother once sang to her. Music, after all, was never just her career. It was the language of her soul. As her voice aged and cracked, it didn't lose its beauty. If anything, it gained something deeper, the texture of a life fully lived. In her final chapter, Connie Francis has become something both rare and profound. A living legend who doesn't chase legacy, but quietly lives within it. At 87, she no longer seeks the spotlight, but the light hasn't left her. It lingers in the way people still sing her songs at weddings, in karaoke bars, and at family reunions. It's in the letters she receives, the documentaries that mention her name, and the countless voices she inspired without ever knowing it. Connie didn't just survive the music industry, she outlasted it. While many of her peers have passed on, Connie remains a link to an era that now feels mythical. A time when radio ruled, when heartbreak was pressed onto vinyl, and when a voice like hers could change a generation. But unlike so many icons who faded tragically or flamed out in chaos, Connie found a way to make peace with the pain. She didn't erase the tragedies, she acknowledged them, processed them, and carried them with grace. In recent years, fans have seen glimpses of her, an old photo shared by a relative, a birthday video tribute, or a rare radio interview. Each time, her presence feels like a gift. There's no need for her to tour, to release another album, or to explain herself. Her story is already complete, written not just in music history books, but in the hearts of millions. Her finances, once shaky, are now stable thanks to shrewd decisions in later years. She retains ownership of key parts of her catalog, ensuring a steady income and the ability to remain independent. She owns her home outright and lives without debt, a sharp contrast to the cautionary tales of other entertainers from her era. She's not wealthy in the flashy Hollywood sense, but she's rich in freedom, in memory, and in peace. Connie has no children of her own, something she once admitted was a quiet sorrow in her life. But she considers her fans her family, and in return, they have embraced her as a mother figure, a grandmother of pop, and a warrior in heels who never gave up. In that way, her legacy isn't just musical, it's deeply human. As she sits near the window, watching the Florida sun set each evening, she's not haunted by what might have been. She's proud of what was. She lived, she loved, she hurt, she healed, and through it all, she sang.